All of the tunnels are underground, where none of the children will ever be found. They wandered away to join the show and lost their way in the world below. They joined the circus and left their town. Now they live here down with the clown.
Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into a storm of spoilers, a podcast covering the adaptation of Stephen King's It that is Welcome to Derry on HBO, currently still owned by Warner Brothers. This podcast is split into two sections. In the first section, called The Calm, we will focus on a single piece of It media. This week, the 7th episode of Welcome to Derry on HBO, titled The Black Spot, and will not spoil the few things we know about the Welcome to Derry finale, though this episode is pointing in some interesting directions. In the second and most likely final storm section of the season, Neil and I will break down what we expect from It Welcome to Derry's final episode of its first season, based on the teaser for next week's episode and some prevalent theories about how the story is connected to the films. We're not spoiling, we're enriching. Why, hello, I'm Dave Gonzalez, and I've read the book by Stephen King.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I have not read the book by Stephen King. And even though I don't like clowns, I think we got a banger on our hands this week, and I can't wait to talk about it. So welcome back to a storm of spoilers. Before we get started, some very important housekeeping. Next week, of course, we'll be back on Monday, the 15th, for our final Welcome to Derry episode 8, Winter Fire, which will, I'm sure, be a very foggy affair. And then the following week, Dave and I will be back with one more episode to wrap up 2025, including all the things we covered on Storm of Spoilers and maybe some best of TV of the year. Unfortunately, for those who have been pining for it, it does not include an update to the yearly movie bet. I want you to know that we tried very hard to make that happen, but it's not going to happen. Then we're going to take some time off, and we will come back in January to cover A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. We'll be diving right back into Westeros. So we'll be enjoying the couple of weeks off there and then getting back into some George R.R. Martin stuff. If you would like to watch this podcast, you can get us over on YouTube, youtube.com/@DaveandNeil, Da7e and DNEIL. If you'd like to see what we look like when we record the podcast and all of the fun graphics that Dave adds to it, it's pretty great. And if you would like to support not only our work elsewhere, but help us keep this show going, the best way to do so is over at patreon.com/DaveandNeil, where not only will you be very supportive of us, but you also get a bunch of extra stuff, including bonus content from the years of Storm of Spoilers and new stuff that we release every week, including our pop culture adventure podcast every Friday. December is our 2025 recap series. Last week we did our essential TV shows of the year. This week I am cramming movie screeners so that we can do our essential movies list. And also very exciting, if you join at the highest tier of our Patreon, you get another podcast called Eat the Rude, which is our Hannibal rewatch. And we just finished season 2, which is a wild one. And we'll be entering season 3 of Hannibal as we close out this year of 2025. It also gives you access to our previous rewatch projects of Twin Peaks and The Leftovers and anything we choose to do in the future, which I think there will be some fun stuff ahead. So join us on Patreon. It's really great. How do you get in touch with this show? You can send us a Raven, stormofspoilers@gmail.com. We do have a Raven that we'll talk about here in a little bit. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Leave us a 5-star rating. Say whatever you want. We didn't get any reviews on Apple Podcasts. We might just have gotten reviews from everybody who still uses Apple Podcasts. But we did get a very lovely comment on Spotify from user Jay Freese, who says, "Y'all are exactly what I was looking for. You can watch Derry from face value and enjoy it just fine, but you all nerd out over the lore and open up the whole Stephen King universe for a much deeper understanding. That is the goal." And we are glad that that is connecting with you. So we hope to do that not only for Welcome to Derry, but in the new year with some Westeros content. All right. time to get to this episode, which I think we might have diverging opinions on. I'm very excited to find out what that's all about. But I wanted to start with this listener email, Raven from the Sewer, from Ross, who doesn't really have a question, but makes an interesting observation here. Ross says, well, I'd like to thank last night's radio broadcast simply stating that the black spot was, quote, on the edge of Derry to make it make sense. It doesn't make sense unless the airbase literally extended its boundaries to Derry city limits in the past, but at least we have the show logic. Apparently the pillars are the melatonin to encourage Pennywise to sleep every 27 years, and this appears to be the avenue of quote-unquote victory for our 1960s losers. They somehow restore the pillars, or at least force Pennywise back into hibernation and save Will. A bold prediction, but also from the safety of knowing that Will Hanlon exists in at least closer to the 1989 story that we know. So I guess a pretty safe prediction there from Ross. And I don't know, I guess this is an interesting place to start, which is Pennywise was about to go to sleep, and then the military did some fuck shit.
Yeah. He was in his clown stew sort of apocalypse now slumber period, which I very much appreciated the design of. And I guess and woke up.
We're left to wonder, Dave, or at least I was left to wonder, what if the 27 years thing is just more of a Pennywise or the entity deciding that it was going to do that, like it just gets tired and goes back to sleep, or if there was something about the cage that made it go to sleep, or if something happened along the way, like with the indigenous tribe that's been containing it, that caused these cycles to come about. So it does seem as if messing with the cage allows him to not only stay awake, but obviously move around a little bit more.
I at first was mad. I was mad at the back half of this episode because I think it's very strong for the first half and is very good at sort of splitting the choices between adapting parts of the book and sort of being its own thing. This sort of confluence of characters at the black spot, and Ingrid shows up and sort of confesses to having orchestrated some of these things to happen. All of that felt like things coming together. And then afterwards, I think the biggest switch for me is Dick being like, well, feels like it's asleep to me. And I'm like, why would we take that at its face value? That, now it feels like it's asleep. And I do appreciate that it maybe did go to sleep, and it did go to sleep as a choice, because in theory, the losers from It Chapter 1 interrupt the cycle before there's an augury and basically send it back to sleep, which leads towards what you were saying about it kind of gets tired. Like if it expends too much energy doing something, then it's going to hibernate. So there is some sort of
it can only deadlight so many people in one cycle.
There's some pre-existing evidence that maybe that works, and that is it's sort of doing every 27 years based on its internal hibernation cycle as a being that exists outside of time and space. I do think, though, this sort of we broke the pillars and now it's out, it only reads as odd to me because I was giving this series a bit more credit when it came to us understanding things about the rules of it. And I assumed that, and we talked about this in previous episodes, they were eventually going to pivot back to what the book and It Chapter 2 says about how you fight it, which is a belief-based weapon. Or at the beginning of this episode, I really like the Rich and Marge stuff, because I do think love can be a weapon against it, ultimately. That's what saves Bev from the Deadlights. And I think if Will is going to be saved from the Deadlights, is probably going to be the thing that needs to unlock Will from whatever state he's in. Because I like the idea that belief and love, these sort of positive emotions, can be used as weapons against it being of like fear and hate. The weirder thing is this series is like, but also the dragonglass that he fell in creates a cage that not only limits him, but keeps his, it's a idea that they're creating a whole bunch of rules in a place where they didn't need to create those rules to begin with. I was giving them so much leeway on just its belief, and it doesn't matter if you think this is going to work or it's not going to work.
Sure.
So my mind, in trying to cope with the end of this episode, is trying to think about, is there another reason that it woke up? Is it more about Will being back in Derry when he spent this little time period sort of flitting in and out, but now they're like, don't stay on the base, go back into the cage, and that's why it shows up and it terrorizes Will immediately?
Yeah.
Like, does it want the kids bad enough that it was more like, oh, all the kids are back in my cage, and less that the military just dropped one of an seemingly arbitrary number of stones into a kiln, essentially?
Yeah.
Which was the part that made me feel weird. That whole scene with General Shaw made me feel weird. So
I mean,
if we're going,
I still think that the whole cage idea could still be a bit of a red herring, right? Like, I think, and Ross's email points out, like, oh, maybe it's just about somehow restoring the pillars to then put him back in his cage. I think it would be an interesting narrative twist if they try that and it doesn't work. Right. And it turns out that shit didn't impact the entity at all, or that it was just their belief, like the indigenous tribes' belief in that made that work. And because it's now going to be like the military and the losers who are doing it, they don't have that same strong belief necessarily. So maybe that's not what is going to ultimately, because it feels too easy, right? Like this notion that they destroy the one pillar, but Lily's got the dagger. So that could, I guess, be a pillar. So it's like,
right,
easy solution, just put him back in the cage. I don't know, that's a pretty short finale episode, if you ask me. And I think that as a narrative solution for a show that does actually seem to be fairly clever, is too easy.
I hope that you are right. I am wondering if at all we go outside of Derry, because that is what the implied threat is by General Shaw's breaking of the cage, is like, it is now out. But when it is now out, it seems still very focused on the children of Derry. So I like the idea that, once again, the military doesn't have the best idea in mind.
It was out before the more ancient indigenous people put it in this quote unquote cage. It stuck to the woods, right? Like they were able to live alongside it even then. So I think Shaw, I mean, first of all, the whole Shaw of it all is funny to me, because I love that, especially initially when the reviews came out, everybody was like, aha, what is this show trying to convince us that they're going to use Pennywise against the Russians? And as it turns out, it's not against the Russians. They want to use it against woke of the time, right? Like they want to use it to bring back traditionalism in America, destroy the women's movement and the civil rights movement, and bring about a very pasty peace across from sea to shining sea, which is hilarious to me, and shows that this is a show that was written in 2024, 2025, and has some of those ideas on its mind. So I found that kind of funny, but I also do think that, like we've been saying about the military plan pretty much from the start, there's no way that any of this is right. Like the military has no idea what's going on here.
Right. And the most favorable comparison that I've seen online that I will give some credence to, because it makes me feel a little bit better, is what Shaw is outlining is basically the motivation behind the Red Scare. The communists are out to get you, so you better shape up, you better be super American, you better obey the non-communist laws that we have here in this country. And here, when applied to it reads as stupid, but it probably was just as stupid when it was happening in our actual American history. So the military is dumb, I admit, from a meta standpoint, is maybe some forgiveness I will give it. But I do think the Shaw scene, especially the way it unfolds with Leroy sort of threatening him at gunpoint and Shaw unveiling everything, kind of came off as like a clumsy Watchmen as it was dramatized. Because it's like, oh, I'm going to give them someone they could really fight for. And when we're united against an enemy that, you know, is non-human, will, you know, somehow shape up.
Yeah.
And I just don't think the show needed to go there.
Well, I think to me, as I was watching that scene, it felt like the show really sort of leaning into this more recent television trend of don't let your audience fall too far behind what's going on, or, you know, it's very hand-holdy
trend.
Yeah, like it's like, okay, so if people are watching this scene where Major Hanlon is trying to stop them from burning this shard of dragonglass, and they're going, wait, what's going on here? We need two characters to walk into a room and spell it out very clearly. It's, you know, it's funny because as I was browsing my timeline today, I saw a lot of folks very rightly saying immediately, oh, this season of Welcome to Derry is already better than Stranger Things season 5. And I agree with that. But this was maybe the most Stranger Things season 5 scene of Welcome to Derry season 1, because it's like, let's stop for a moment and have a couple of characters spell out exactly what's going on so that we don't lose anybody. And I don't know if this show necessarily needed to do that, but you know, here we are. And the fact that it's only just like this one scene is, you know, wedged into an otherwise really good episode is fine with me.
Yeah, I hope that whatever we learn next week makes me feel better about this specific aspect of this week, because again, it's just it does. Thank you for bringing that to the tip of my tongue, but it does read as like second screening, and it reads as like you're making too many rules for, again, something we didn't need that many rules for. I could have told you what the military was doing was a bad idea before it turns out they were doing something else that is an equally bad, if not worse, idea.
I mean, it was a bad idea the moment they went into the sewer the first time.
Yes, absolutely. Let's continue to talk about this episode through our corners, because by the time we get to popping the polygon balloon, we'll probably in reverse talk ourselves into the black spot. But most 1960s thing, the historical context corner, we were sort of already talking about. Everything Shaw is worried about were, I guess, woke things that were happening in the 60s. He did pick the very specific things that we would identify now as woke things happening in the 60s, which I think read a little bit more basic than it needed to be.
Sure.
But that being said, that does place it historically where the time is. And then the other thing I clocked was Charlotte correctly states that no one will notice Hank isn't Leroy when he's wearing Leroy's uniform when they're moving throughout Derry, which is just all black people look the same, which I get. Were these two things enough for you to point to racism in an episode where this event, at least it takes place in the book, is straight up just the KKK burning down a black jazz club? Here in the, you know, series, it's been complicated a little bit, but I do think they're intending it to read as sort of Pennywise feeding a natural racism. Was this too softened for you with the inclusion of Hank Grogan, the fugitive, or does it work?
No, I think it works. I mean, I think it's nice because it's actually not as heavy-handed as I would have kind of expected a TV show to be. Like it feels soft only because a lesser television show would have been a little bit more explicit, right? Like instead of Universal Monsters masks, they would have hit some slurs. They would have maybe had they would have maybe had a meeting with their hoods on or something like that. But I think that it's very clear, and from the response that I've seen so far, everybody understands what this is, right? Which is that this is about racism as much as it is about catching a single fugitive, and I think it works really well in setting up that part of it before the clown ever really arrives. Like it does seem like Pennywise just kind of shows up about 2/3 of the way through the fire because he's like, I smell meat. right. Like almost as if he didn't start it, even though we can see how he has subtly kind of maybe orchestrated this with, manipulating Ingrid and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think the show did a good job of not being too heavy handed or not needing to, feed us like very obvious over the top racism, and still very clearly communicated what was going on here, and made a very terrifying sequence out of it, especially after they like leave and they shut the doors and that, I mean, the oner that we're going to talk about, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Once they leave and shut the doors, the exterior of it, when you hear the screams of everybody, that is basically how it is presented in a lot of the book, because that is the horror concept that Stephen King chooses to engage with, is look at what these humans are doing to other humans before the clown shows up. And at least in the book, the clown shows up in a bird form and just takes some of the KKK members while they're not paying attention. But also in the book, what I really appreciated the show kept over is in the book, it is Will that Dick escorts out of the black spot when it's lit on fire, because Will is a service member in that timeline. Whereas here, Will is of the kids, but they've still sort of rigged it up so Will is escorted out of the black spot by Dick. So there's, in a world where the 27-year cycle is also being messed with, they're also tying back to the book in unexpected ways that I appreciated. But then also, I guess, complicating things, because I'm going to save the wonder again for popping the polygon balloon, but a lot happens in the black spot while it is still on fire, including sort of what's happening with Dick finally acknowledging the spirits. It was threaded in last week's episode with Leroy saying maybe you could talk to the spirits to help us. And I like this idea that when that was presented to me, I assumed he was going to talk to like a dead serviceman or something. But here we learn that maybe The Shining can be used for good. Some shades of Danny Torrance, because he sees the indigenous warrior who had battled Pennywise before and is able to sort of use her to get the kids out. Once again, I get what they're going for here, but they don't have a lot of time necessarily to flesh it out entirely. I'm hoping that it's slightly mystical indigenous person to me.
Sure.
But this is a series that is like moving in reverse. So I do have a feeling that in this warrior still being around after The Shining, and in her playing such a key part here, that maybe the 27-year cycle and what's happening with the children of Maturin could be a further storyline for future seasons, where we have questions posed here and follow that storyline back.
I would almost say it has to be, because one of the thoughts that I had as I was watching the opening sequence, which is our 1908 flashback, is, okay, how are they going to have 2 more seasons that move us back in time when this season has actually answered quite a few questions about the past? Right? Like, you can't now do a whole season about how Bob Gray became, got sucked into being the entity, because they did that in one scene here. So they're going to need something else to build on outside of that if they're going to do a 1908 season, for example, right? Because I feel like we know a lot about what happened in 1908 at this point, right? We know that we have Shaw and Rose as kids and their encounter. We know what happened to Bob Gray. And so, like, other than showing us the augury from 1908, I'm curious to see what other parts of the story they would tell. And I think that's where you would have the opportunity to go even further back, because if you're exploring maybe Rose's, right, because we see in this season, there's the young woman that Rose and the other elders are teaching to be like the next leader. Right. I wonder if the 1908 season would involve Rose's process of learning how to be the next leader. And I think that could be like really, and that could lead you down the path of a lot of flashbacks and a lot more building out of that particular part of the lore. So I think that's, it's an interesting corner for the show to paint itself into, but it raises some fun questions, and I think gives them some room to do some interesting stuff if they get to season 3, if Netflix or Paramount or whoever ends up buying them.
Well, I think they did a good job too they showed me enough of the 1908 things that I understand what they're going for. I understand that Periwinkle was Bob Gray's wife, and that it appears that they worked as clowns, probably in a circus. But since his wife's death, he and his daughter Ingrid have been, on this traveling thing, and he dreams of going back to the circus one day. That's an interesting character. I'm gleaning a lot of that story from his clown act, so from a drama.
Yeah.
So that could be complicated if Bill Skarsgård wants to come back for a 3rd season and not play Pennywise, which I think is a cool pitch to make for an actor.
Sure.
Where it's like, play the hits for 2 seasons and then we'll let you come back and do something a little bit more complicated. But I also think we see Bob Gray lured into the forest by it, and then we have it tell adult Ingrid that he ate Bob Gray. I don't think we necessarily saw that in a way that you could build to future seasons. And I think the sacrifice of Mabel and Ingrid's recognizing that thing is her father gives us some story to do in the 2nd season, but also means that we don't have to necessarily close out Ingrid. We don't have to feel great about how Ingrid's story ends this season, potentially going forward. That being said, her just getting deadlighted and getting to hear the deadlight theme was very thrilling, and I think a fun ending to this story.
Sure.
And I really like the scene that she has with the clown. That was like several times I'm like, this thing's just gonna eat her, but they kept putting it off.
Yeah. Well, this might be a good place to talk about Bill Skarsgård a little bit. Because I do feel like this is the Bill Skarsgård power hour for this season of television. And I almost feel like he's having such a good time playing Bob Gray in this flashback that it almost feeds into how much energy he gives to Pennywise in the back half. Because this is, I would say, some of the best Pennywise stuff that he's delivered. Just
do I have face on my face as an all-time?
He's got
Pennywise.
some great one-liners. His movements, his expressions. This is, he's very good in the movies as Pennywise, and he's rewarded with a ton of Pennywise screen time. But I almost feel like this episode alone is the best of his like fully engaged, all the way over the top Pennywise performance. And I mean, I think some of that is they do some different things with the look of Pennywise, right? The makeup effects are a little bit, they vary from scene to scene in this one, but I just think that he has ascended to another level with this character in this episode. And this may be a result of them being very patient at the beginning of the season, right? Not bringing the clown out until much later in the season, that now it just feels so much more interesting and much more impactful. But now that he's here, it's just, he is so good. And it's like, you how did we get from Bill Skarsgård not sure he wanted to even come back for this to him giving this like fully tuned up, locked in performance?
I love the differences between Bob Gray and Pennywise, where it's just like, I had always assumed, especially because in the second, in chapter 2, he appears in a vision to Bev as like an evil Bob Gray. I like just how different they are in characterization. Like, Bob Gray has the wonky eye. That's something that Pennywise sort of adapted from Bob Gray. But he doesn't, it's not it's not the it wonky eye. It's like a realistic version of the wonky eye. And it just sort of like dials it up to the point where it's not human anymore. There's the scene where Ingrid finally gives it a hug, and we see it from like Ingrid over the shoulder, and then we cut back to sort of like Pennywise's expression. And I'm just like, oh, that's new. Like when Pennywise came to this series, he spent his first episode doing the jiggly run forward and, you know, turning into the face that he ate Georgie with. He like played the hits. And this episode's Pennywise has some different shades just by the nature of us seeing how it sort of was trying to imitate a human at one point and has just gotten it entirely wrong. So I really, really appreciated that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the conversation between Ingrid and Pennywise, though, how much, if you're it, what are you thinking about while this is going on? Because you're an interdimensional being of fear and hate. Even when you use tools, you don't feed them belonging necessarily. He hasn't like ever, he didn't show up to Henry Bowers as his father being like, I love you, son, kill the losers. You know, it is a negative entity. And it does eventually turn on her saying like, I ate your father and your father lives on inside of you. How much human has it adapted either through eating lots of humans? If he's telling the truth, then there's a part of everybody he absorbs inside of him.
Right.
Which I've heard say, you know, because when we see the deadlights, we also hear screams that like,
sure,
he's literally got souls inside of him.
Well, and also when we see him sleeping for a few seconds there, we hear all these like voices and things like that.
Yeah.
Which you could interpret as him hearing the town, but you could also interpret as him, like, as he's sleeping, he's dreaming about all the people he's eaten. Right. He's hearing all of the pieces of humanity that are inside of him, which I think is really interesting. I think this could be a really interesting avenue for the show to explore in future seasons, which is, this is all part of, because now that we know that he didn't become Pennywise until 1908, the entity didn't become Pennywise until 1908. This is all part of these first few cycles where it's learning how to emulate and manipulate humans. Right. And Ingrid has been this sort of, ever since like 1935, when he first encounters her again and realizes who she is and what she's looking for, he's maybe been working on a way to like, how do I use her type of thing. Right. And it gets to this point where like she figures it out. So he needs to just like deadlight her, you know, pull the ripcord at the end. But I think that having a Pennywise that is not fully sure of what it's doing as this clown entity and is sort of like making it up as he goes along sort of thing could be interesting, because as we go back further in time, it becomes a rougher and rougher version of Pennywise. And I kind of like that, especially as a performance piece for Bill Skarsgård, to take him further and further away from the Pennywise that we see in the movies, which I think is like his most powerful, most focused, most capable form. And right. I think that's kind of fun if that's what the show's trying to do.
Yeah, I like the sort of like arc in reverse for sure. And it is going to be interesting to see if like the version we saw in It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 is the most human it ever gets. But maybe that's also what opens it up to being hurt by fear. Maybe I might be Hannibal pilled a little bit because of our other project, but there's a real sort of like, if no one could hurt him, why wouldn't he play with his food sort of attitude when it comes to Ingrid. But that being said, I'm wondering just how much he's able to manipulate Ingrid. She seems a little bit terrified that she's going to lose her father when it, goes to hibernate, which means she probably has some sort of idea of the cycles. But as we see in this episode, the cycles seem a little bit more like a suggestion. So has he had to keep up? If this episode is the idea that Ingrid realizes Bob Gray isn't in there, then that means from 1935 to now, she's thought Bob Gray is somehow still around.
Right.
whether he is in ghost form or on the edge of town or what have you. He could reappear as like Bob
or whether
Gray,
like
in theory.
Pennywise was Bob Gray, but just possessed, maybe. Right.
You want to know the weirdest theory I've come up with that has
Sure.
some sort of theory? So in the book, when it is scared in the final showdown with the losers, it's basically like, if you leave me alone, I'll let you go. And I can't make you immortal, but I can make you close. Did Bob Gray make a deal in the forest? And Bob Gray is actually still around somewhere, dead lighted or otherwise. But, you know, you could come out and use him as a puppet. Could be a fun reveal. But we don't really know what the point of deadlighting somebody is right now in this canon.
Sure.
There was the idea that
because
maybe
in the movies it's he deadlights Bev because he's going to eventually eat her, right? Like he just like to hold her in place.
Right. But it seems like from the clown stew shot where he's just surrounded by body parts that he, you know, has a lot to feed on. So he doesn't necessarily need to hibernate like a spider and keep things there.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen the floating children around his sort of lair that we see in Dick's vision and in It Chapter 1 and in Chapter 2. So the idea that maybe he's deadlighting people to feed on them might be secondary to he's just deadlighting people to keep them.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what the purpose is that he has if he's not feeding on them. But I guess in theory they could be around. It seems to have some crazy powers. And why not explore those powers as the narrative expands?
Well, yeah, and you know, it's been a couple weeks now, but if I recall correctly, Bev being hit with the deadlights in the first movie gave Bev some access to
the future.
Timey-wimey stuff in the second. So I wonder if that will come into play for either Ingrid or now Will Hanlon, which for Will, that's even more sad, I guess, if you can see the future. But I think that could be a very useful narrative tool here in the finale. But, you know, we'll talk about that in the storm.
Absolutely. Kingverse Easter egg this week. I don't have a lot of great ones because this was very focused on Derry, and we have talked about some connections to the book. Other ones, connections to the book that I noticed while they're cleaning out Rich's stuff in the standpipe, he does have a Lone Ranger toy, which in the books, at least, Stutterin' Bill, he's a big fan of the Lone Ranger. That's why he names his bike Silver, keeps yelling "Hi-ho, Silver" away. They did adapt that over to Bill a little bit. I think he yells it in the background one time they're riding bikes in a Chapter 1. But it was nice to see that there. It's nice to see some of our book losers being transferred over to our new losers. And then, of course, the double turtle shell cover for our pillar that gets unearthed. Once again, we are being teased by this turtle god. And maybe that's the long game of this series, is we're eventually getting to a place where we could do the turtle god.
Sure.
But it's still here. Even after you think maybe it wouldn't. I noticed on the previously on, while Lily was showing the shard to the other losers on the standpipe, she's like, it looked at this like it was afraid of it. And right at the top of her wrist on her left hand thing is the turtle charm on her charm bracelet. And I'm just like, guys, I really hope that I'm not, I'm not huffing the copium here and that we're really moving towards a turtle. But if not, another fun Easter egg in this series that keeps telling us there's a good turtle god, but refusing to show it to us.
And listen, now knowing that that's something from the books, that at some point someone communes with the turtle god.
Yes.
And I guess logically knowing, especially because of, you know, when they made that first It movie, that it was sort of a proof of concept. Like, all right, let's prove that we can make a popular mainstream version of this that is going to make a bunch of money. That could have been conceptually a little too weird, right? To get past the Warner Brothers brass. And I would think, especially the way that this show has, you know, entrenched itself a little bit more in the lore and is playing around a little bit more with like some of the weirder elements of the story, that's something that has been sort of gnawing at Andy Muschietti for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I didn't get to do the turtle in the movies, but maybe I can do it in the TV show. It'd be really fun if they get to do it in season 1, but I could also, I'm not going to give up this, is someone going to eventually commune with the turtle god thing? Because again, you're right. They can't help themselves but to bring about the turtle stuff. Only one of the pillars was buried in a turtle shell. And of course it's the one that the military digs up.
Yep. It's going to be interesting to see how important the pillars are, because if this is a story told in reverse, then this is if you invalidate it here, you also invalidate it through the past. So if all of a sudden we stop caring about the pillars here, it would be interesting to see if they try to use them in future seasons when us, the audience, knows it doesn't necessarily work, which could be possible. We know how the losers defeat it now, and it's still functioning as a series in terms of telling the story. But I do wonder if it continues as a TV story for 2 more seasons. Like, is The Shining a plant here so that when we go back, we could do more psychic stuff or more mystical things? Was like The Shining our, layman's way to open the door to the mystical side of Derry, so that when we go back to the 30s, when we go back to 1908, we have this mystical side open to us that can eventually include the turtle, that includes the fact that the Deadlights can see the future, like all these things that we know are lore. It would be interesting for me to see, especially with the success, I think, of Dick Halloran on this show as a character, if they think Welcome to Derry is a show where every season has some sort of Stephen King universe psychic aspect to it. Do we get to the Toad Ash space from, the Mist or the Dark Tower series or any sort of these things? Because Welcome to Derry embraces the psychic half of it in the way that the movies didn't. I think that's possible. But again, could be just me doing a lot of copium because I want to see this turtle god. I want to see the turtle god on an HBO show. I can't let Mike Flanagan's Amazon Dark Tower eventual thing be the first people to get to the turtle god. I don't think. Not when you have the It property specifically. All right, let's get on to popping the polygon balloon. We learned in the making of segment after the episode a little bit about how they stitched together the black spot oner. I wanted to start by asking you, resident nitpicker of digital ash and smoke, did the stitches work for you?
I think the stitches worked just fine. I did have a good chuckle to myself thinking, at least they didn't try to cover everything up with digital smoke, but I guess digital fire works just as well. Where it's just like, let's make everything blown out yellow fire. And I actually think that it works better, right? Because some of the instances, especially on HBO shows that we've talked about, have always been more realistically lit spaces where they're covering it up with like gray smoke. So I think using the intense yellow smoke here and sort of the nature of the geography of the scene, right, where the camera POV is inside the black spot the entire time, allows them to, I think, get away with a lot more. And I think it works. The chaos of it works because we don't really have a whole lot of time to sit there and nitpick each individual shot. And I also think that it's heightened in a way that makes it feel kind of stylized and surreal and almost a little dreamy, especially when it starts to actually get a little dreamy when we get into like Dick's POV. So I think that even though I can still see some of the seams and I can tell that, they sort of overdid the amount of smoke in that sequence to sort of cover up. I do think that they ultimately pull it off because it's well choreographed. It pokes its head out the window, like the camera pokes its head out the window in really interesting ways and is adds to the terror of the moment by showing like what the perspective would be if you were trying to escape. Some of the shots where people get hit are really brutal. And I think that it's all so fast and intense that we don't even notice all the digital smokiness of it. And so, you know, kudos to them for pulling it off, and in a, you know, sort of wonder. It's funny because I didn't even really perceive it as much of a wonder the first time I watched it. Because it's
I was
not moving around the space as actively as, you know, like you think of some of the oners from like Game of Thrones era, but it does just feel like we're just in the chaos the entire time.
Yeah, I actually like it a little bit more because I'm not so focused on the fact it's a oner, and I was trying to decide why that worked so well for me, because I do think they overtuned ever so slightly the color treatment and the smoke. But I see why they did, because the sequence does incredibly well at making sure that I'm looking at the thing that's happening that it wants me to see, but then also basically communicating that chaos is everywhere that I'm not looking, which ultimately is the purpose of the shot. And I think it's really smart that we spent right at the beginning of this episode with the standoff, and definitely the end of last week's episode with sort of the dancing, setting up this as a very simple action geography. It's a big rectangle. There's a bar with a room behind it that Hank's been hiding in. There's sort of a back room where they've been keeping, or there's the sort of the behind the bar, there's the fridge that we know has been rotting the floor loose, so we know that there's escape there. Like, we have all the things that I would sort of occasionally tweak future HBO oners for. Was sometimes it felt like the oner was moving us from action set piece to action set piece, just sort of like communicating that the battle was happening. This one, I think, did a really good job of using the space, and because it was a giant rectangle, I'm not going through doors. I'm like peeking out the windows like a person would be. I'm not going panic room like through keyholes. I'm not venturing out. It was just very controlled in trying to sell these specific story beats and these specific visual effects, which I think is all you can ask for. I think it was ambitious, but not overly ambitious.
Yeah.
Because it does stop doing the oner, and it stops doing the action photography when we have to tell some story in the Dick dream state you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they achieve a lot by keeping it fairly simple, and then the clown shows up and they're like, hero shot of the clown. Yeah. And you know, that's cool. I mean, that's what puts butts in the seats for this particular show, is eventually people do want to see the clown do crazy shit.
Yeah. This definitely cleared up my color theory for me, though. Thank you, color treatment of the fire. Yellow, also bad. Red, intense Pennywise, bad. Yellow, Deadlights, bad.
Sure.
I was debating it. Not anymore. This episode was pretty clear on the color theory.
I did.
Especially on, I think we're fully sapping blues out of the color treatment.
I did have an interesting color theory thing that popped up as I was watching it a second time. Because, and I think it's both a geography issue and more of a time of day issue, because we get the scene of the kids going back to the standpipe to clean up Rich's stuff, right? That emotional moment where the girls are talking about him never getting his plane to Main Street, which is very sad. And also these kids are just killing it. Great performances. But that's so hued blue that it feels like it's like an evening shot. And then it immediately cuts back to the soldiers in the field, and it's like high noon daytime. And I'm like, what? Are these things happening at the same time? Are they happening on different sides of the planet? That was one weird sort of inconsistency for me. And I couldn't tell. Maybe it's just a continuity issue. But I was like, why put those scenes next to each other if they don't seem like they're happening at the same time of day?
Yeah. I mean, my guess is, I also noticed that sort of time jump. And my guess is we're going to pick up with the kids at the standpipe, because those are the three, and because of Lily's aversion to letting the weapon go, the dragon glass dagger, those are the people we know in the place that they need to be. So we might just pick up there, and they didn't want to end the episode on us feeling good.
Sure.
Even though maybe we're not ending our episode, but towards the close of our episode, now's the time. I think they did Rich and Marge pretty well.
Extremely well.
In terms of what it had to be and the slow build to it over the season. What were some standout moments for you in terms of either the construction of how they got there or the execution of the very sad final dialogue?
I mean, I think it's all of it. It's the execution of, you know, the sort of slow build of him finding that box that he's going to put her in, and then the slow realization that I think the audience is a little bit ahead of the characters, where it's like, obviously they're both not going to fit in there. And, you know, me being a person who's on this podcast, and I'm sure anyone who listens to this podcast was like, oh, here it comes. Here comes the moment where we lose Rich. And I think they nailed it, right? Like, this is the kind of huge emotional death that happens to a character that, again, they've spent multiple episodes just gassing up how much we're supposed to like this character, only to snatch him away. And I think that this is one of the things we've come to expect from our HBO shows, our big prestige dramas, that at a certain point, not only are we going to lose someone that we like, but we have to do it in a way that is so emotionally impactful that it becomes the thing you remember from the season. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, people will remember this episode as not just the one where the black spot burned, but the one where Rich became a knight and saved Marge. And I think credit to both of the kid actors. They're giving incredible performances in this moment, like full range of emotion stuff. The little kiss that he gives to the box is just amazing. This kid that plays Rich is like really good.
Yeah.
And same thing with the young actress who plays Marge. Like, this turned out to be a really incredibly effective pairing of two characters who felt like they were sort of side characters at the beginning, right? It felt like it was the Lily and Will and Ronnie show. And for this to be like the huge emotional climax moment of the season is pretty awesome. And it proves out the theory that we've been talking about I think it proves out the theory that we've been talking about for most of the season, which is the idea that maybe Marge is Richie Tozier's mom, and that Richie Tozier is named after the heroic Rich.
I am still waiting to see if we are just on a cliffhanger about him having a poem written in the sole of his shoe. I think that was just a beautiful setup that could be a gut punch later in the season. But yeah, I really like this, especially because my fault, as much as everybody else, I had kind of stopped paying attention to the kids. Will was sneaking off of the army base like there was no barrier on the army base, and Lily has been very traumatized, but the same traumatized for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And I had mentioned before, Ronnie is just very one note, which I understand why, but as a character in this story, I was like, other things are happening besides your father. So I was very happy to see this sort of anchor to the episode be Rich and Marge. And I think you're right. They're sort of build from like side characters to characters who absolutely believe, to then sort of Rich giving up his life, not to defeat it, but to, save the person he loves, I think is a great arc. It really also sort of drove home for me how little I cared about Polly. Sorry, R.I.P. Polly, who saved Will and his friends in the sewers by stepping in front of a gun. I was just like, oh yeah, when I remember the death from it's probably going to be this one, not any of the other ones. Even though Polly's death was very tragic, this one I think is a much better example of how to set up your pieces and knock them over than I think Polly's was. Even though I think Polly's worked, this one felt like a season build. Sure.
And I am hopefully looking forward to seeing Marge get some sort of revenge in the finale.
Yes.
Like, I hope that she has a very pivotal role to play in at least getting it back into its cage or defeating it for now.
Absolutely. Or she stays in Derry to defeat it. That could also be something that is as heroic instead of having to, actually face it. Who knows? I think there's a lot of cool ways to go because they hit the climax of that arc. So now I can't wait to see what the sort of end conclusion is.
Do we ever see Richie's mom in It Chapter 1? I can't remember.
You don't.
Okay.
And she is mentioned as being, I think it's Maggie, which is a synonym for Marge.
Yep.
In the book, so it is possible that is there. It's also possible that because they didn't mention it in It Chapter 1, they don't even have to do a name change or anything. This is just the reveal.
Yeah.
Which I think would be fine. I also enjoyed an interview I read with Madeline Stowe after this episode, where it clarified something for me, where she was like, the producers had long discussions about whether or not when Ingrid shows up to the black spot, whether she is the one that gets Hank out because she actually loved Hank, which, especially since Hank sort of survived the fire in the actual episode, was interesting to me. I could see why they'd be tempted to do it, but I also see why that's like too emotionally complex,
right?
For Periwinkle, given how much
it's too much for Ingrid to do when she gets there.
Yes, but it did sort of open up the idea for me that Ingrid, who gets deadlit but also moves her eyes afterwards, which is another version of comatose we haven't seen quite yet in the series, maybe has more to do with Hank this season, just on the very possibility that they wanted this other piece of their story, this other clarification. And if we are dealing with a series that is doing some amount of second screening retread, the unanswered question of did Ingrid really like Hank or was it all a Pennywise machination might be something that they bring up. I don't know.
Let me ask you this, Dave. While we're on the subject of Ingrid Kirsch, because she comes back as Mrs. Kirsch in It Chapter 2, right?
Yes.
Which is 27 years after 1989. I'm not going to do the math right now, but she would be well over 100 years old at that point.
Yes. It is. I don't think the real one, unless
this is the
has
thing.
Some sort of supernatural power.
Do we think it's possible that we see in between now and the end of this series, in the next episode, Mrs. Kirsch no longer exist, and that Pennywise is able to, similar to the way that he overtook her father's look, right? That to then imply that the Mrs. Kirsch we see in It Chapter 2 is just a full manifestation of the entity and is not actually her. Because I think for a while now I've been thinking maybe this is a story about how the clown gets one over on Mrs. Kirsch and she becomes a tool of his that he uses going forward. But now that I've kind of seen her, most of her arc at least, I'm thinking maybe this is just how she gets eaten and subsumed by it.
The thing about Mrs. Kirsch that people have found so fascinating, both in the book and in It Chapter 2, is it is a version of it that appears.
Right.
That is not pulled from the fears of the person it's trying to scare. So similar to Bob Gray, which is why people found Bob Gray so interesting, because it seemed like at some point the clown was just, or it was just like, what, I like this clown guy, I'm going to appear like it a lot. Bob Gray is also the name of the leper in the book. So the leper that terrorizes Eddie in the movie, that's all like goopy and whatnot, also introduces himself as Bob Gray in the book. So this idea that it sort of took on a persona is interesting. And then Kirsch shows up to terrorize Bev, but in the book, Mrs. Kirsch transforms into the witch from Hansel and Gretel. But in the movie, it just transforms into like something that like yells at Bev. So maybe the way that this series is giving us sort of a introduction into why likes to appear as Bob Gray, you're right. It is going to give us an introduction as to why it can appear as Mrs. Kirsch, despite the fact that Mrs. Kirsch has nothing to do with Bev.
Yeah. Well, and I also do think that's one of the why it chose Bob Gray is something that it answers here in this episode, which is when the little demon boy from the woods says to Bob Gray, like, the children seem attracted to you.
And that's where I'm going to have to say we are going to have to return to this particular line in the storm, because I have a thought on that, but I can't now.
But you agree that it's important. There we go. I
agree that it's important. But I did want to, before we got off of Ingrid, stay here in the polygon balloon, as Mr. Kirsch has some car trouble that I think his wife set up, but that keeps him at the black spot where finally her papa shows up and cleaves the cleaver. He cleaves his head in half.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important narratively, and also because I think it sounds like it happens in the books as well. At least one of these racist dudes needs to have a terrible ending, right? Because the other ones just get to drive away and take off their masks and go sleep soundly with their families at night. So I like this as, divine justice, and that Mr. Kirsch seemed like a real piece of shit, and also pretty cool effect. Like when he... First of all, it's one of the most clown things that Pennywise has done in this show, which is show up
just
with the cleaver.
Oversized cleaver.
It's like, where did he get that? And why does he need that? And it's like, oh, well, he's a clown. Clowns just have shit. And then he chops him up. And I love the effect right as he chops him of like the tongue still moving. And then he makes it even more gross by like just casually snacking on it. It's just extremely gross. This is also where I wanted to point out, Dave, that even though this is not a digital effect, shout out to whoever on the production team was in charge of the Pennywise drool. Because I know Bill Skarsgård is a great actor, but there's no way he's generating that amount of drool on his own. So like someone's got to be like just off screen, some production assistant or member of the makeup effects department with just like a little squirt bottle of drool at all times, because there's a lot of it this season. So I'm actually really, really impressed with it. And again, it I think it adds to the intensity of Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise performance. He has really turned it up to 11 here in ways that I think are way more fun than what we got in the first two in the movies.
I'm not saying this is based off of Sinners because it has a burning club for Black Americans and a lot of drool, but it is weird. It happened twice in the same year.
That's true. And I think both from the same studio. And I think that, again, this is, it's interesting that these are, two movies telling stories about old timey racism that still somehow resonate with the current moment, because, they're obviously written in this year, or last year. So I think that, people are, I don't think that these two things are playing on each other, right? Like, I don't think that Andy Muschietti is like doing an homage to Sinners, but it's not fully coincidental, and I think people are right to draw those conclusions. And maybe we should ask ourselves as a society why storytellers have this stuff on their brain, and go from there.
Before we get into the storm, I did want to highlight some It timeline updates. We talked about in 1908, It attacks Bob Gray, which we know there. I have put it after Skeleton Man attacks Francis at the circus, because at that point, it would have probably appeared as the clown if it was trying to lure in children, not as the Skeleton Man. But when we saw Francis go into the forest, Periwinkle was dressed entirely in her costume, holding her horn, and there were red balloons. And that kind of feels like waiting for her dad to come back. So is it possible, do you think the Skeleton Man attacked Francis after it attacked Bob Gray?
I mean,
because in this week, it seems like the first time he saw his daughter as Periwinkle was right before he disappeared.
Yeah. And I think that So it is also still possible that when Francis encounters the entity, that it doesn't fully have a grasp on what it wants to do with the clown skin yet,
Right.
So it's still just doing whatever is the scariest to the person. I mean, even in 1989, it's still doing that, right? It's still presenting as your most intimate fear before it presents as the clown. So
I just think like it is possible that also that Bob Gray, he hasn't eaten Bob Gray yet. Like, we have this whole deadlight thing. We don't actually see him die.
Maybe he's got Bob Gray down in the sewer floating.
Well, there needs to be enough season 3 plot with these characters to have something. So I think we've been given enough pieces to assume we know what happens, but none of them are connecting in a way that makes me think I actually know all of the events that happened.
That's a good point.
And then also I wanted to add Black Spot Augury, April 1962. We had a date for that, but then also immediately afterwards, it awakens and attacks Will. So we will have to see what happens in terms of what we understand about the augury going forward. We do get that one scene you were talking about was sort of the disbanding seemingly of the children of Maturin this week before I assume Daniel's going to run back.
Sure.
No, that's a Storm question. I'm going to start off the Storm by asking you how much happens.
I have one point about that meeting though. Will always credit a show for an excellent deployment of the term shit asses. If you've ever seen like Reservation Dogs, it's just a fantastic term that I've put inside my own lexicon from watching a lot of very funny indigenous comedies. I don't know where that word comes from, but it's awesome. And this is just yet another perfect deployment. I'll see you shit asses in 27 years.
Well, on that note, I'm sorry, Neil, is there anything else you feel like we need to cover in the call before we head into the storm?
No, but I have all kinds of fun questions for the storm.
Well then, see you shit asses in the storm.
Well, you got trouble, my friend. Right here, I say trouble right here.
What are you doing in the sewer?
Oh, storm blew me away. Blew the whole circus away.
Oh boy. Where do you want to start? Actually, you know what? Let's start where we usually end because I want to talk about some endgame stuff. So let's get the episode 8 trailer breakdown out of the way.
Okay.
We see a blood-covered Pennywise, like he is at the end of this episode, in his little Pennywise cart, tooting, it looks like a French horn in the smoke. At the very end of the teaser, we see a bloody hand pressing the school intercom. I'm guessing this is to lure the kids into the gym to get like the mass deadlit thing that we've seen in the trailers. We see the 3 girl losers realize it has Will by sort of the poster wall of all the kids that it has taken. Can't wait to freeze frame that poster wall and see if there were some of these other kids that we missed, because when the children of Maturin are like, oh yeah, some 20 kids have gone missing. I'm like, oh, we've only caught a few of them. So that's fun. We see it grabbing Marge in the smoke. We see Dick Hadlin sort of having a bad time, seeming to have like a psychic vision. We see Charlotte and Hank with guns in the smoke. And we've seen them in previous trailers, sort of in an ice cream truck with Rose. So it seems like that's going to be their motion this episode. And then we see the military firing some guns in the smoke. I'm going to guess at Pennywise, but I think that also means Shaw's there, which means the line from the trailer, I've always wondered how you taste, now I think is like almost 90% to Shaw. Yeah. That's how Shaw exits our story.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of questions this raises. One, are we going to get a shot of Pennywise riding his cart through the middle of town? That would be fun. Because I think one of the things that even like the opening credits of this show has implied is that in previous auguries, the Ironworks fire, the shootout in 1935, the clown seems to be even more present than what he is in the Black Spot. So I kind of think that what we're going to realize here is that either we're getting a double augury this time around, or that our Children of Maturin council is wrong about this being the end. And maybe this could have been the end, if the military had not done what, messed around with the ancient artifacts. But I think that it's entirely possible, and this would be a very fun twist, especially for an HBO show, especially for a show that has done a really good job of escalating things from episode to episode. If the black spot isn't the event, and what comes next is the event, and that it is even more Pennywise centric, right? And that when we look back on it, it'll be like, well, Pennywise just sort of showed up at the black spot because he smelled meat. And this one is the one where he's going to come to town looking to, get as many victims as possible.
I also think it's possible to make Pennywise even more dangerous because, at least in terms of canon, the black spot is the final augury.
Mm-hmm.
Because when the losers face it in the 80s, they get it to retreat before any sort of augury, and then they beat it in the 2016s. So, like, something big could happen here. Our understanding of the final event could change in a way that we just didn't talk about in It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2.
Sure. Because everything we know about it comes from Mike Hanlon's research.
Right.
So and the history can be blurred very easily.
Or the ritual of Chud didn't happen as far back as we thought, and we're about to see that they do a ritual, they put the deadlights back in the cage, but it massacres the entire children of Maturin while they're trying to do it, and drives them out of town where Mike finds them in It Chapter 2. I just don't know how much this episode has on its mind as a finale, and how much of that is to be seen later. The idea that we have two characters that are deadlit, which according to It Chapter 2 gives them glimpses of the future, is very interesting to me.
Yeah. And especially because one of them we know survives this ordeal. Right.
Yeah, him knowing sort of Captain Christopher Piking his way through the series, that's a Star Trek reference, would be very, very sad, especially since we kind of have to wrap up these kids, we have to wrap up these kids in their storylines by the end of the episode, which has led me to this theory that we might get a flash forward or a series of flash forward themes to sort of tie these together. You talked about Marge being Richie's mom, but obviously she's still in Derry and still keeping kids in Derry. So maybe we see something that traps her there, or thinks the kids, if they do stop Pennywise, think much like the children of Maturin. Maybe they have to replace them. That keeps the kids there.
Or maybe something happens to her that makes her forget everything but Rich.
Or, very, very possible. Lily, or let's go back. Ronnie, in this episode, it uses Ronnie's voice on the phone to call Will. And not only is Veronica Grogan a voice that comes from the drain in the book, it comes to Bev in the It Chapter 1 movie. And so we had been assuming that Veronica was dead, but apparently it could use its voice even without Veronica being dead. So I'm giving a little bit more, all of this is tragic and crazy if Ronnie ends up being Will's mom and her and Will, ends up being Mike's mom and her and Will end up getting together ultimately to burn to death in Derry, as we learn. That could be tragic, but it would also give Ronnie and Will a reason to sort of maybe try to escape Derry and come back. But it also gives us a reason to look forward into the future and see both of those characters as adults in the tragic situation that we know that happens.
Right.
Because I think all of these are going to be sort of tinged with tragedy to a certain extent. The one that I'm sort of excited about that someone brought up, I think it was maybe the Heavy Spoilers channel, was that maybe this season is the Leroy character telling Mike these stories. Because we know Leroy survives because he's played by Stephen Williams in Chapter 1. Stephen Williams, 76, very much alive. Harrison Ford's in bigger movies at much older age. We could see him come back. And maybe he's telling Mike these stories because Leroy has stayed in Derry for some purpose. And that sort of connects these old losers, these other losers. And I like it because that saves Jovan Adepo's character for me. He's really off the rails this episode. He was kind of off the rails last week's episode. For a man without fear, he doesn't have a lot to do these past 2 episodes. So I would like to see him wrapped up somehow and explain why he's in Derry. Someone mentioned maybe the Hanlon farm is over the site where they dig up the pillar. So they put the pillar back, and then Leroy Hanlon builds a farm over it and stays to protect Derry.
Okay, I like that.
I think that's kind of fun. The one that connects to Mrs. Kirsch, and the one that is sort of the biggest reach, but is something that we've seen in the trailer, is in the this season on trailer. We've seen a brunette hanging at what looks like Juniper Hill. We have now a catatonic Mrs. Kirsch there, so that could be her. But several people have pointed out in that shot, there's sort of a man in what looks like a uniform, could be a janitor's uniform, kneeling, and then a redheaded child sort of standing next to him. In the theory would be that is Alvin Kirsch and Bev, his daughter, and that Lily ends up actually being Bev's mom, who hangs herself before the events of It Chapter 1. So that would mean that Mrs. Kirsch appears to Bev in It Chapter 2, and Pennywise takes on Mrs. Kirsch's form because Ingrid Kirsch had gained the trust of Bev's mom, Lily. So that would be a familiar grandmotherly-ish figure to her, or at least someone adjacent to Bev's bloodline. And that's why Ingrid haunts Lily and therefore haunts Bev all throughout the timeline.
Sure.
That shot being there, if that shot is behind the shoulders of Alvin, Kirsch, and Bev.
Alvin Marsh?
That is what... Marsh. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Alvin Marsh and Bev.
A lot of Kirsches and Marshes in this town.
I know. Alvin Marsh, we did see an allusion to him in the first episode. Alvin Marsh with a heart carved around it was on the graffiti in the girls' bathroom. So they have seeded that Alvin's around. In the book, he is a janitor at Juniper Hill. So if Lily gets committed to Juniper Hill at the end of this episode, meets Alvin, has Bev, and then when it wakes up, realizes it happens and hangs herself, that would, in theory, be the scene. And just the fact that that scene exists in the trailer is what makes me think maybe we get some flash forward scenes.
It could be fun. I mean, and listen, this, I think we've talked at multiple points about how if they are really going to work backwards, this is kind of their only opportunity to make a strong connection to the movies.
Yes.
Because the further and further away you get from that, you're just having to connect it to what happened in this season and maybe, obviously what happens before. But if you're going to have any connection between the losers of this era and the losers of the movies, is kind of got to happen in this last episode. I don't know how long this finale is. Have they announced the runtime?
I don't think so.
But, it feels like there's a lot to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a longer episode.
We also don't have any confirmation at this point, but a lot of people are saying the voice on the Derry radio this episode is a stealth Bill Hader cameo.
Oh, fun.
So if they're bringing in cameos and people, then maybe they're going to connect to the movie in like a big flashy way. I think it's a really smart move for what you're talking about, but also pretend you're making It Welcome to Derry season 1 and you're in the writer's room and you have no idea if there's going to be a season 2. Why not bring in all the cast members who want to come up to Canada and play with you again to have little moments? And It's been very cameo light in terms of actual actors, but very cameo heavy in terms of characters we're paying attention to. So this could be a way to do it and connect it in a way that makes some sort of sense.
Well, and I think it also, again, rewards the show's patience, which is they waited a while to give us the clown, and now the clown is here in a big way. And maybe they wait until the very end to take a big cameo swing. And I think I would almost certainly say if they did that, it would work. Like, I can't see a scenario where that doesn't work to a certain extent, especially because, especially if, as you've outlined here, they're able to connect all of these kids to the future losers. That'd be kind of great.
Can't wait to find out. Poor Stan got connected through a murdered brother that existed.
Yeah, unfortunately, we saw Stan's dad, and that's it.
Yeah. I guess, is there any question that you have at the end of this episode that you think we are absolutely not dealing with at the in the season finale? Is there a way that I sort of clocked, I hope the Indigenous story is a season 2 thing? Is there anything else that you clocked as like, this is a question I have that doesn't have to be dealt with in the future, but can be dealt with in the past?
Well, I mean, we've talked pretty extensively about all the potential nuance of the Bob Gray stuff. I think there's still plenty of room there. I feel like we don't know hardly anything about 1935 other than the fact that Ingrid was there at Juniper Hill and saw the clown.
Odds of a zoot suit Pennywise next season.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, pretty high. And that, Pennywise was using Juniper Hill to like farm children, which is, I think, potentially very interesting. You could see a season 2 being a very like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but with kids sort of situation. That's very Juniper Hill focused. I think that could be really interesting. But I mean, really the big question for me is anyone going to commune with this damn turtle god? And I think I hope that there's room for it here. I think it's more possible that it's something that gets saved for like a season 2 or a season 3. But we've been very meticulously clocking all of the turtle stuff, and I don't think that Andy Muschietti is going to be able to let this go.
I think it's the turtle is an interesting narrative or interesting storytelling tool because the hardcore fans want it. And they're putting in Easter eggs for it. But they're putting in Easter eggs for it where we could not see the turtle until Welcome to Derry, Season 3, 2030. And the result would be once we've seen the turtle's always been there.
Yeah.
So like the fact that the charm on Lily's bracelet is around all these times that she's repelling it, we could not deal with that at all. And then years from now being like, oh, it was the charm. And have a reason to go back on our Netflix-owned HBO and scroll back and be like, "Oh yeah, it was there." That's kind of a smart way to do it. That's a smart way to do Easter eggs. It's very similar to, there were 3 Infinity Stones always here when Marvel decided to do Infinity Stones, which is sort of like a retcon that you very slightly built, where you're like, "This MacGuffin means something, maybe." And the book readers will like it for just being there, and we could pick it up later if we want.
Yeah.
I have to assume that's what it is, especially because they keep saying children of Maturin to describe the Indigenous people on the behind-the-scenes things, and 0 people have said that in the actual show.
Yeah.
So I'm like, just name the god, please.
Right. That only means something to people who have like literally read. They don't even, they didn't say it in the movies either. So I think that's really interesting. I think the other big question I had, which is more of a what aren't they showing us in the trailers sort of thing. Because I think, as I correctly predicted last week, we started this week with pretty significant amount of flashback, and then the black spot sort of ate up most of the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
But in this coming week's trailer, we get a lot of the what's going to happen in town when the fog rolls in. And I was like, all right, well, what are they not showing us? What's going to happen outside of that? Or is this just going to be a very foggy episode? But I think you've kind of answered it with the prediction of the flash forward. I think the flash forward would be if the episode sort of picks up with Pennywise has awakened, the kids find out that Will has been taken. Pennywise rolls into town on his cart and begins snapping up all the kids for his big feast. And then maybe there's a portion at the end of the episode that flashes forward after this fog situation has been resolved. That makes sense to me from a pacing standpoint.
I think, yes, I'm with you in that. I think we're mostly seeing the first front half of the episode, just by nature. That makes sense. There's a super cynical part of me that's like, what a blessing to have a finale that's partially in gray smoke, because then all of your trailer shots, you could just put gray smoke over it and people will assume, oh, that happens in the smoke.
Mhm.
Or it's just like, it's just a trailer shot. Who knows? All of
Sure.
these things could happen without any sort of gray smoke happening. It is a very green screen friendly environment. But yeah, I think we could spend a very quick amount of time with this sort of climax and then fall off into sort of a denouement of the story. The interesting thing is, a couple of weeks ago in the storm, we brought up a t-shirt that had the many versions of Pennywise on it, that included the Skeleton Man, which we saw, Clown Stew, which we saw this episode, and sort of the red from the nose down Pennywise that we saw this episode, leaving the only one that we haven't seen, Winged Pennywise,
Sure.
who has giant wings, also has red from his nose down. So I do think we're going to get a winged Pennywise in this climax, which is pretty exciting.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know how long this climax is going to take, but I do think, like we were talking about with the weird standpipe lighting issue, I think everybody is already where they are to begin this finale. The finale could just be getting everyone to where they need.
Right.
For instance, Charlotte's with Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Rose is the one who knows about the pillars, and Lily is the one who has what we are assuming is the replacement pillar, but has no knowledge of what that one does.
Right.
Outside of is afraid of it. So if the plan is to replace the pillar with Lily's thing, someone needs to connect Rose and Lily so that the kids have the knowledge that that's what they're doing. So that's at least one scene we have to see. They're trying to get Hank out of town. Hank has to, get to Canada. Doesn't look like it's going to happen because we see him driving around the ice cream truck in the fog. And then we later see
Ronnie's not with him,
guns.
so they're going to have to go get Ronnie first. And then they're probably quickly going to realize that Will has been taken. So side quest time for that group.
We're seeing none of these characters together, but they have information that would require them being together. So I do think it's possible to have a very quick Pennywise forward bloodbath with a very bittersweet ending where our surviving heroes dedicate their lives to making sure it doesn't happen again. And we know it fucking happens again. Mm-hmm. But at least the next time it happens, it's the last time. So maybe we're seeing the first step in some sort of weakening or understanding. I am so hoping that we don't have enough time to dig deeper into the fucking pillars.
Sure.
And whether or not they work or not. I still think it would be fun, much like the turtle, to have us quickly replace this pillar, quickly have Shaw get eaten, and then we go into season 2 thinking the pillars do something, or even season 3 thinking the pillars do something and then realizing it wasn't. I still think ultimately I want this show to end with belief and love being the weapons. And that's what I'm now looking for in terms of what do we learn about it next week? Why is it back? How can it be beaten back? What does it want with the dead lit people? Can't wait to find out.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. I don't need any more information. I don't need them to spend too much time on the pillars. And I don't necessarily even need to have an answer on whether the pillars really work or not. What I do need an answer on, though, Dave, is what happens in this next episode that closes the book for the military? Is it just that Shaw dies here? Because this is, especially after this week's episode, there's a lot more moving parts to this military operation than I thought. Like it for most of the season has felt like Shaw is just running this like small clandestine operation where he's recruited a couple of airmen to help him find these pillars. But now he's got like science teams and they were ready to burn this thing. And I need some sort of resolution that makes me understand why the military isn't still trying to do something about the entity in the 80s. Because they don't seem to be present at all in it, chapter 1.
All the interviews that I've seen after this episode is that the creative team knew the black spot thing existed, came up with this idea of doing the story around the black spot, and used the idea that in the book, the black spot was a military hangout for African-American servicemen. And that was like the opening idea to the whole season. If that's true, and their sort of series arc is to go back in time, then that would sort of communicate to me that we're absolutely getting the end of the military thing, because it chapter 1 and in chapter 2 does not even mention the base.
Yeah.
The base could be gone by the end of next week if it's now able to reach to the base beyond its sort of boundaries that it used to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I need the military to lose hard.
I think that's good. They definitely think that the season has prescient sort of themes because the government is overreaching, which I think you could have also in 1935. 1908 is going to be a little bit different to check out, but either way, none of that we have to deal with. Next week, we just have to deal with Welcome to Derry, Episode 8, Winter Fire. Does seem like maybe, I don't know. Actually, let's go around this. Neil, what are the odds that by the end of next week, Jessica Chastain is on our screen?
Ooh, Jessica Chastain's a big one.
Her hair is winter fire. She also really likes the Muschiettes.
Yeah, okay, all right. You reminding me that she's like good friends with the Muschiettes is brings it up. I would say it's like an 80% chance we get a Jessica Chastain cameo. Like, I don't think we get a James McAvoy.
Right.
But
that would seem, well, nobody's connected to Bill so far.
A Jessica Chastain, a Bill Hader. I could see that happening for sure.
Yeah, Bill Hader looking at a picture of Marge, being like, my mom was cute when she was, oh no, that's gross.
I always wondered why my mom had that scar over her eye.
Yeah, I always wondered why my mom gave me an eye patch.
A Cuban Corsair's eye patch.
Good old Cuban Corsair's eye patch. Anyway, until next week, go out there, be excellent to each other. R.I.P. Richie.